Hi. So you might have seen on some of my media my increasing reference to this activity of or aim of depoliticizing sustainable mobility, something I would call increasingly part of my mission, my interest. Also, I want to mention straight off the bat, if you feel that depoliticizing sustainable mobility is impossible or a fool's mission, and your impulse is to only want to discuss how we cannot do this, I do welcome you to stop watching this, close the video, and go enjoy your life and keep scrolling, because there's no need. People need to engage with content that triggers them or that they just want to argue is impossible or not a worthy mission. So that's not welcome energy here. I do welcome any dialogue, any activity about how this is perhaps a vital part of the mobility paradigm shift, but also a really challenging part. I'm very much down to talk about the challenges. So how did I get here thinking about depoliticizing sustainable mobility as part of my mission? Well, there was some point during my activities with pedestrian space and all the workshops I was doing and the talks I was doing where I recognized I'm in my bubble. I'm in the bubble. I'm in the bubble where the vast majority of people agree with me. They're already on board with the ideology of, why we should be moving towards sustainable mobility. I think it's not only an ideology, but an imperative. But so I am aware, however, that there's many people, many groups of people, many types of people who are not familiar with this language, who are not, first of all, thinking about mobility all the time. That's something that mobility professionals, mobility advocates, mobility researchers are doing. It's not really the nature of the average person to be thinking every day about their mobility choices in depth and how it affects society. It's for the mobility advocates, researchers, etc., to be bringing that right to the mainstream and inspiring interesting dialogue and action on that. So I realized that if I really want to have some sort of meaningful change, I'm going to need to face that tension and that challenge of engaging with groups of people who may not have ever heard of the term walkability, who may not be used to talking about public transit as an issue of equity or as an equalizer in society. Now, today I was thinking about that phrase, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. So I think most of my fellow Americans, if not all, are familiar with this phrase. This US American phrase connected to societal, cultural mentality, certainly existing in other societies too. But this very particular US American phrase, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, of equating hard work with success. So I'm a long-winded person and I really want to keep this video under about 6 minutes, so I'm not going to get into the nuances and unpack, all the dimensions of this phrase and issues of contemporary society and equity, but I do want to connect it to issues of privilege and mobility. So this morning over coffee, I was talking with my husband about inherited wealth, which is not always generational wealth. I had to reflect on my own privileges growing up. At some point in my youth, very upper middle class. I will state today, I'm not a wealthy person, but I did grow up with a certain degree of great privilege, I would say, due to the success that my parents had from their hard work. A story I think many fellow Americans can relate to. So even growing up with the privileges I had, and if we're thinking in terms of autocentric mobility and society too, certainly, on the day of my 16th birthday, getting the keys to my brand new Jeep, even growing up with this type of privilege and with this type of mindset, there were moments when I glimpsed how access to quality, safe, affordable public transportation, or lack thereof, was an issue of equity. Public transit wasn't something that I was used to growing up as a daily thing. It was something, that we did when we traveled, but it wasn't something that in my life growing up in Southern California, I experienced as a daily thing. We drove. So, and then I later drove myself. But even so, growing up, I had those windows into recognizing public transit as an issue of equity. and that for people in auto-centric communities and societies, if you don't have an automobile, you can be living a very non-functional life, especially, obviously, if you don't live in a walkable area. And this is the case in many places to this day, not just in the USA. So if you're still listening and you're like, hey, I don't care about equality, you know, we do have these people, it's a perspective I don't agree with, but I certainly can understand how it has developed in our hyper-individualistic society. It's like, okay, not really interested in engaging too much on, you know, why some people don't care about equality. That's for another time. But I will say, what about the health of the nation? It boggles my mind that people are sometimes completely unwilling to recognize that the health of their neighbor and fellow community members does affect the health of community, the safety of the community, ultimately the safety, health of, you know, the wider city, town, whatever you live in, and ultimately the health of the nation. I don't care what side of the political spectrum you are on, don't you care about the health of the nation? Now, connecting this back to mobility, which is my main focus, one of my main focuses at Pedestrian Space, here we come to the notion of equity and access to mobilities that are just. And there's notions of transport poverty. It has different names in different places. Transport inequity. I'm not going to unpack all these terms, and there's many of them. But the notion that if you don't have access to a car, or, you know, your car is not functioning, you also don't have access to local, really functional public transportation, this negatively affects your quality of life. It negatively affects your ability to be a functional person in society, even if you want to be. So it behooves everyone who cares about the health of the nation to want to prioritize diverse forms of mobility that are accessible, affordable, and safe for people to use. This, in fact, empowers people more to be able to pull themselves up by their bootstraps.